Welcome to Homestead Reptile. Let's talk about enclosure size and the different life stages of crested geckos. So from adult, juvenile to baby. This is Obsidian Butterfly. She's a 50-gram female. That is her oldest son, who is a 19-gram male. So these two live in two different size enclosures. My Obsidian Butterfly lives in a 20-gallon, which that is an 18 by 18 by 24. Her juvenile son lives in a 12 by 12 by 18, and that's a 10 gallons. And why I keep them in different size enclosures. Her One of her youngest sons, and this actually is her youngest son right now from the last breeding, he lives in a 12 by 12 by 12, which is a 5 gallons, and he's 13 grams. And you can see that size difference. As they get bigger, and he's being a bit of a creep, so I have to keep an eye on that. As they get bigger, I move them into different size enclosures. And this is a 16-gram female, and she's currently living in a 12 by 12 by 18. So we have these different geckos, different sizes, different ages, and different needs. Now this is a 6-gram baby, and he is living in a 12 quart. And then I have he's being a creep again. Then I have another baby that's coming up. That will be the absolute smallest, and you rarely ever see them sold at expos or by reputable breeders, but I have seen babies this small being sold in pet stores before, big box pet stores. So that baby is pretty much a newborn. It's about a month old, but you will occasionally see them. Now, this guy right here is a tiny baby. He can sit on my fingernail. So I have seen them being sold this young before, and this is about a month old, a little bit less. But you absolutely do not want to put that size baby in a full adult size enclosure. So there are some reasons why I don't recommend it. So we have the baby can get lost in the enclosure. And what I mean by lost is like difficulty finding them. I keep big, elaborate bioactive enclosures with custom backgrounds with lots of little nooks and crannies, lots of plants. And when they're fully established, it's difficult for me to find an adult. It's going to be such a pain in the butt to find a newborn baby in that if you have to take them out to weigh them, to socialize them, to make sure they have all their shed is not on their feet, and just the dangers of being in a big enclosure. They could get stuck somewhere because they wedge themselves somewhere and you don't know it, and then you don't see them ever again and they just die. So that's one reason. The other reason is dehydration and the ability for them to find their food. So this is the enclosure I recommend for people keeping babies. So this is a 12 quart, and I will put up the dimensions on this enclosure. I'll put up the dimensions for all these enclosures. So this is a 12 quart shoebox you can get off of Amazon. You can get packs of 12 of them for like $35. You can make them into bioactive enclosures, and this is absolutely perfect for a baby this size. He's actually currently living in one of these. And it's absolutely perfect for a newborn baby to live in one of these. They're big enough for them to explore, move around, and get exercise, but they're small enough for you to be able to move, put your hand fully back in there, and look for them. And I've seen babies where people have kept them in really large enclosures, and they're not controlling the humidity properly. They're letting it dry out too much, or they're soaking it too much, and they have respiratory issues. They'll have skin problems, stuck shed, and it's just because babies are fragile. They're very fragile, they're very delicate, and if it goes wrong, it goes wrong quickly, and they die. So this is why I recommend smaller enclosures for babies. And then you move them up as they get older. So, like I said, that 19-gram baby is living in a 10-gallon. His mother is living in a 20-gallon. His youngest sibling is living in the equivalent of a 5-gallon. And then his other slightly larger siblings are living in anything from 9 to 10 to 6 gallons. And that's depending on their size and their stage of life. Now, each gecko is an individual, and some geckos do not do well in moving them up too quickly into a large enclosure. They might go off food. They might get stressy, and some geckos are like, you throw me in a big enclosure, I'm perfectly fine. And it really depends on the gecko, and it also depends on how you set it up. So if you take this enclosure, and I just had a few items, like say like this is not enough for a gecko to hide in. It would be stressed out about it. But if I littered it with leaf litter, plants, and vines, it would be perfect for a smaller baby. Now, if you don't want to do the shoebox, you could do something like this. I prefer the shoebox still because I like the door, the front opening door. It's less scary for the babies. But also, that shoebox is actually bigger than this. But this is a nice little display cage if you have a little baby and you just want it to look good. And again, you want to add more leaf litter. There's no babies currently living in this enclosure. It's one of my spare leftover enclosures that I just have ready in case I ever need it. And I'll put up the dimensions of this enclosure as well. But this is a great enclosure for that 6-gram baby. The 13-gram baby would be a little bit too big for this, so I would do anything from 3 to 8 grams in this enclosure. Again, here's that 13-gram baby, and you can see he's just a little too big for that. And a 19-gram baby is absolutely massive. A 19-grammer will not work in this. It's way too small. But you can do the 6 to 8 grams. I think would work perfectly fine for this enclosure for a little while. But you really have to look at the gecko's size, their personality, and how well they are healthily. So if you have a sickly baby, keep him in a small enclosure because you're going to have problems if you throw him into a big enclosure. And again, if you have a sickly baby, you don't do bioactive, paper towels, and just monitor. So this is the equivalent of, I believe, 8 gallons. I haven't used this one in years. It's, again, one of my leftover enclosures that I have just for any spare reasons. Like if I go out and see a gecko I really want that would be appropriate to fit in this size enclosure, I get all the stuff ready for it and I put a baby in there. Or I would say like a juvenile, but that rarely ever happens. I'm not just going out and getting geckos randomly. But this is just one of my backup enclosures. I always like to have backup enclosures for whatever reason. Say a gecko gets sick and I have to strip this down to make it into a quarantine. So right here we have our 13-gram baby, and he's going to be our size representation to see if this is going to look too small for this size baby. So this does not look too small for this size baby. So he could actually go in this enclosure quite easily. So he could do, this would be great for a 13-gram baby. This would be great for a 16-gram baby. And I'm going to put my 19-gram juvenile baby right here. And he could do it. I think it's pushing it, but he could, but I would prefer him to be in, if you have a 19-gram baby, go with something a little bit bigger than this. But this 13-grammer could go in there, definitely. This would be perfect. Just add more stuff for him to play in, more hides and more leaf litter. Perfect for a 13-gram baby. This 19-gram baby is just a little too big. But this is a hexagon enclosure. Just one of those random old enclosures that I have laying around and that I don't ever get rid of. So this is the equivalent, and I'll put the dimensions up. This is the equivalent of, I believe, 8 or 9 gallons. So this is perfect for this baby I have in here. There's a ton of stuff for it to hide in. And this is what I would call an appropriate enclosure setup for a baby. Lots of things to hide in. Lots of branches and things to climb on. I'm going to be adding some more tubes and branches a little later. But this is for a 17-gram baby. And I will, again, put all the dimensions up. It looks like he cleaned his bowl out last night. Really good. But I like to add these fake plants in here while the real plants are still growing out. But this is a perfect size for... So you could do 16 to 18 grams in this. You could almost do 20 grams in this. I like it because it has a lot of depth to it. It's a pretty great enclosure, and the roof is a high-rise roof, so it adds an extra 6 or 4 inches of depth to it. So it's really great for that reason, and it's perfect for your juveniles to grow out. Now, they're ugly, but they're functional. So just because it's ugly doesn't mean you should be swayed away from it, because, again, these are temporary enclosures that you're growing out babies in. But I'll put the dimensions up of all of these enclosures, and you'll be able to get a better understanding of the size difference of the different ages.